We have some people who are new to the Wyoming Liberty Group, at least new to our office here. I know Dr. Rhoda came down from Casper. Chris Emmon is here from Riverton. And we have some new faces, so welcome to everybody. We have prepared for you some literature this time, because oftentimes we get the question, well, what can I do? And if you can run for office, that'd be great. If you can find an office to run, even if you don't think you're going to win, you can stir the debate. But if you need something else to do, which is very important, you can be informed. So we gave you this one-sheeter to points that we hope will be your takeaway from the meeting, as well as some more substantive things. A recent paper by Dr. Larson, and something on the Wyoming state budget by Amy Edmonds. We have a new person here, Tom Rose. He's from Du Bois, and he's looking into juvenile justice in our state. He's very interested in Vermont, the Vermont system, which has very similar demographics, but they've done a lot to improve their juvenile justice system. So he's thinking of working with folks in Vermont and in Wyoming to see if we can make some progress there. Tonight we have Amy Edmonds speaking. She has wonderful background in being on the Appropriations Committee. When she did serve in legislature, she's just recently vacationed her legislature, and she's digging into the details and the facts. You can't have reform unless you know what's been going on. And believe me, Amy is finding out. Sometimes she's making it a little hot for the people who are trying to spend some of the agencies, and that's all to the good. So, and then we have Dr. Larson. Dr. Larson has been looking at ways to contain government through parity and through Tabor kind of initiatives, and he's written a paper, a scholarly paper on that, so you can read his paper. So I'm going to turn this over. Oh, and next month we're going to do Key Liberty Votes. Charles Curley's coming down from Thermopolis. He's read every single bill that went through the legislature, and he's rated them, and he's worked with volunteers. Also, Don Wills back there has been doing a parallel rating, and so we're going to be able to see how your legislators are behaving with respect to liberty. So he'll be speaking next for the first Tuesday of May. And okay, Amy, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Everyone in the back? Everybody can hear me? I'll try to project. Thank you all for coming tonight to this month's Liberty Forum. You know, ancient Greeks saw politics as an essential part of the human life. Aristotle went so far as to say that man is, by his nature, a political animal. And these ideas stand in stark contrast to our current culture, where just so many of our fellow citizens don't value political involvement. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all tonight for coming here, for driving. Some of you drove a distance. And for those of you who are watching online, thank you. Thank you for supporting the work we do here at the Wyoming Liberty Group. And thank you for recognizing the need to be involved and informed citizens. And for me personally, I just want to take a second to say thank you to Susan Gore, for allowing me to do this work. It may not be exciting for some people to slog through government budgets, but I love it. So, and as I tell my friends and family, this is a dream job, and I love doing it. So thank you, Susan. My presentation is a smaller and a shorter version one that we held. It's a smaller and shorter version of one we held to a small group of legislators, about 13 legislators that came, and we wanted it small right after the general session. We also had a representative from the governor's office. I've been studying the Wyoming state budget over the past decade, so from about 2001 until right now, just looking at and identifying areas that drive up spending. And we're doing this study not just to look at numbers and to decide overall how do we decrease here, how do we decrease there. We're doing this study because we know first and foremost that government growth is detrimental to our life, our liberty, and our property, and we must stop the tide of growth. The more government grows, and the more it eats away at our private sector and our individual liberties, and that is at the heart of why we do these studies, not just just to crunch some numbers. So with that in mind, I want to take you through my portion of this evening's presentation, the Wyoming state budget, a 10-year review. What are we looking for overall? Well, what we were looking for is spending drivers. And what we found were very quickly we found four drivers, main drivers: federal funds, legislatively initiated programs, revenue-driven increases, and cost increase drivers. And the first one we're going to focus on is federal funds. A budget based on federal dollars is an unstable budget, and an unstable budget is a threat to every citizen in our state. I gave you a case study, just one simple case. Next slide. One simple case study. This one was in the governor's office. In 2002, if you can see, the governor's budget for his office was $11.6 million. In one biennium's time, in 2004, it went to $53.4 million. That was basically an increase of 360%. That's a huge increase. I wanted to give you this as a study. Next slide. Overall, when I go deeper into the budget, what I find is that the governor's office added 5 programs in its budget, which is not unusual. The governor's office budget changes a lot because it's a political office and new governors come in and they have a new agenda. 5 programs that were added were tribal liaisons, a special contingency fund, Homeland Security, Healthcare Commission, and Endangered Species Administration. But the whopper of them all was a federal program, Homeland Security. If you remember, between 2002 2004, we had a September 11th. That added $46.4 million to that agency's budget in one biennium's time. So there's a case study on what federal funds can do. Next one, legislatively initiated programs. This may seem pretty obvious to all of you, but we did present this to legislators, and we just wanted to bring home the fact that every action taken by the legislature that either adds a new program or grows an existing program grows the government. And I gave them 2 examples, and they knew Aquatic Invasive Species Act, which was in the Game and Fish, and the Cancer Control Act in the Department of Health. We really wanted legislators to understand that state and local growth strangle the growth of Wyoming's private sector, and we must reduce the size and scope, not grow more programs. Next slide. So the next one, revenue-driven increases, and this is a really important issue. You can go to the next slide, because in Wyoming, we have a boom and bust cycle, so we have these times of plenty. And as I was going through the budget and looking over the last 10 years, 2006, so that budget session, which was the 7-8 biennium, really was a strange phenomenon where I kept seeing big increases and I couldn't figure out it, couldn't time to programs. And I'm giving you 3 examples, auditor and treasurer and AG, just because these are really simple budgets. They are not big, they don't have a lot of programs. The auditor's budget went from $10.8 to $16 million. No new programs were added. This was just an increase. No new programs, just an increase. $30.6 million in the treasurer's office to $37.1 million, and $54.2 million in the AG's office, the attorney general's office, to $73.8. We call this revenue-driven increases because this is the state was on the beginning cusp of all of that natural gas, so we were seeing huge revenue increases, $200, $400, $600 million in increases. If you go to the next slide. And we have to recognize that that's a driver, and a lot of the more conservative legislators are always finding ways to try to tuck money away, mainly because they know if the money's on the table, it's going to be spent. Here's just a case in point to hone in both the federal fund driver and just the general revenue increase driver. If you look at Agency 60, State Lands and Investments, in 2002 on the federal fund side, they had $1.6 million in federal funds. One biennium later, they had $35.6. That was an over 2,000% increase. If you go to general funds, here we see that 04 to 06 increase. They went from $19.3 million to $49.2, 154% increase. So this is just, I wanted to show you this one because this was an agency I could very quickly show you both the federal fund driver and the general fund driver. Those federal funds were driven by the Clean Water Act, if you're interested. That was a federal mandate. And then cost increase drivers is the last one. And this is just simple things you probably know. COLAs, cost of living adjustments in our retirement system. The Hay Group study was something that Governor Friedenthal initiated to basically try to bring state employees to market, basically. So it drove up salary increases. And in 2004, Governor Friedenthal sent out an initiative to take AWAC positions, which are temporary, positions. And he gave this initiative to all the agencies, basically saying, if you have anybody in an AWAC position that's been there for several years, you need to convert them to permanent status. That was a driver. ECAs in education, so external cost adjustments in education. Our education system are a driver of increases. Bonus pay and merit pay schemes. Our current governor's been looking at merit pay schemes. And of course, health insurance premiums. And Regina Mina is our healthcare expert. She can talk about that. So in this study that we're working on here at the Liberty Group, still to come, we have the federal programs roadmap. And this is, we want to go in and take a look at all of those federal funds and identify every single federal program at every single agency in the state. You would think that that's available, but it's not. You as citizens can't find that information. It's very difficult. There's no one place that houses it. This is critical work because as we saw the recent $53 million grab by the Department of Interior, you know, the feds are greedy, and they're crumbling before our very eyes. So we must unlink our budget from federal dollars. It's unstable and we can't have them. And plus, we don't want those strings. The strings are horrible, and they really drive down the state. And then lastly, another part of what I'm working on is the School Foundation Common Land School Accounts. I'm going to start taking a look at K through 12 education spending, which has been skyrocketing. The Common School Land Income Fund may be upside down by 2015. So we may be out of money in that account. Legislators know this. They passed a change in spending flows in this past budget because they know it and they're worried about it. And it's something we need to take a look at, because if we run out of money for schools, you know where they're going to find that money? You. So we have to keep track of that as well. That is my portion of the budget program.
All right.
After, I'll let Sven, and then we'll both stand up.
Usually go about a half an hour for presentation, then half an hour for questions.
Can you hear me? Oh, Chad's nodding back there. Good. This is hugely important stuff, especially the emphasis on federal funds. You know what happened last week, right? The U.S. Department of Interior grabs 5.1% of our severance taxes, and they're saying, oh, we're going to keep that. Sorry. They're blaming the sequester. I have a blog up on our website, wyliberty.org, where I go through the consequences of this should the legislature and the governor decide to compensate for that with higher taxes. We're putting a lot of private sector jobs on the line if they do that. You would, for example, need a 7-cent increase in the gasoline tax if we're going to use that to compensate for this. You could see if you instead choose the sales tax, the state sales tax, you'd need 0.25% on top of, right there, just on top of what they've increased already. And that would be detrimental, of course, to our state's economy at this point, because we are the only state in the country that during the recession, the trough of the recession, 2009, 10, 11, had negative growth 2 years out of 3. The only state in the country with 2 consecutive negative growth years. What does that mean? It means that all the other states have been able to rebound one way or the other. Wyoming has not. In fact, our trend is negative downward. Now we're even Steven when it comes to growth, and it's it's a very fragile situation. If the governor and the state legislature decide to compensate for these $53 million with higher taxes, we can go into a double or triple dip recession if we're just a little bit unlucky. So my strong advice is that they start looking at shaving away $53 million from the state budget, but even better that they start thinking of the structural reforms that Amy was pointing to that will eventually get us out of the dependency on federal funds. And I would like to see a deal where the federal government doesn't have anything to do with the severance taxes at all. That's a bigger issue to get to. But I wanted to draw your attention to this because it leads over to the paper, obviously, that I'm going to talk about a little bit. The overarching problem, of course, the reason why a $53 million loss of severance taxes like this can cause problems in the budget is that our state legislature has maxed out spending to the level where taxpayers can barely afford it when the economy is doing really well. As soon as the economy slacks off, we get all kinds of problems. You remember the battle over the spending cuts that the governor had proposed. You want to call them spending cuts or spending cuts, it's up to you. But whenever he started talking about just a little bit of shaving off the appropriations, all hell broke loose. On the other hand, they had no problem raising the gasoline tax. This means that we not only have an immediate problem, but we have a long-term problem with government spending here in Wyoming. And we need to get total state spending under control in a structural, systematic way so that over time, it actually doesn't grow as fast. Ideally, we come to a point where we can actually start shrinking it, and then we can reform away non-essential government programs. But the very start of that process has to be some sort of leash on the growth of government spending. And in this paper, I analyzed different ways to do that. The idea was basically this. How can we, well, the question I asked was, how can we take the entire chunk of state spending and put a framework on it outside of which it just cannot grow? And that means every single dime they spend. So I looked at 3 different ways of putting this framework on the total state budget. The first one is called TABOR, and some of you may be familiar with that term. I'll get back to that. The second one is called current price state GDP growth. I'll get to that as well, and I will also tell you more about the compensation of private employees cap. All technical terms. I don't want to get into some kind of lecture about this. The paper explains what these 3 caps mean, but let me emphasize the figures in the paper, because they illustrate kind of the effects we can have. The first cap, TABOR. TABOR means Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. That's the original term behind the acronym. It was introduced in Colorado about 20 years ago. Has not been effective, unfortunately. The reason was that they only capped the general fund. They didn't cap federal funds. They didn't cap other funds, which meant that the state legislators, to be a little crude, instead of having the money, spending the money through the general fund, they rerouted it and put it in the other funds instead. So the other funds started growing faster after TABOR. But if you look at figure 1, I have an illustration of the simulation of what TABOR would have done if we had introduced TABOR back in just over 20 years ago. What would have happened? What would the difference have been in state spending? Now, the way I go about it is I say, let's cap revenue. Let's cap the amount of money that the state legislature is allowed to have. The red line, shows you how much revenue they actually used for spending. The green one shows you, if we had to put a TABOR in place back then, how much would we have spent every year? And then you see the trend. It's a significant difference here. And I'm talking about every dime. Every single, I'm covering the entire state budget from the revenue side. What I'm saying here is that we call it something called spendable revenue. We define that as the amount of money that the state legislature is allowed to spend. And we would have saved, as you can see, an enormous amount of money. If we turn the page to figure 2, you see a similar study of New Jersey. I picked New Jersey because it was the last of the states before Wyoming that I studied. I've studied 14 states now. There you see that TABOR doesn't make any difference at all. And it's the same in virtually every other state except Wyoming. Now, why is it? Why would TABOR work here but not anywhere else? Well, the secret, of course, is that we have the severance taxes. TABOR caps spending in a way that neutralizes the effect of the severance taxes. Now, I think that's good. I'll tell you why. Because of what Amy was talking about. She said that when we have a spike in severance tax revenues that is not necessarily permanent, our state legislators have a tendency of rushing out to spend that money and to put it in some kind of permanent spending programs. No, I can't take that call now. I'm sorry. It's my wife. She's probably watching this. She's calling me to correct something. I don't know. But the reason why it is good to kind of neutralize the effects of the severance tax is that we avoid growing government based on temporary increases in revenue, so that we can be a lot more prudent and keep it where our permanent revenue would be. And Tabor can do that for us much more than for any other state. Figure 3, this is another kind of cap. If we don't want to go with Tabor, we have something called current price state GDP growth. What's this? Well, GDP is the gross domestic product. That's the sum total of all economic activity. And we can define that for a country, for a continent, for the entire earth. By the way, did you know that if you define GDP for the entire earth, it includes foreign trade? Do you know that we're trading with the Klingons? We have a trade deficit with the rest of the universe. I don't know where that goes, but we can define it also for a state, and that's for Wyoming, and that's what I did here. And then I say, let's allow state GDP to grow with including inflation. And there's a reason why I include that. I'm not going to go into it now. It's a technical detail. I'll be happy to explain it if somebody wants to know. As you can see from figure 3, that's not a very effective way to cap spending. Essentially, it would have grown as it had already. Figure 4 is the compensation of private sector employees cap. The people who pay all taxes are ultimately the private employees in the economy. I'm sorry, but government employees who have taxes withheld from their paychecks are getting paid with tax revenues. Therefore, the private sector pays all taxes ultimately. Private sector employees earn a compensation that includes a paycheck and benefits. And the value of that is, if you will, a tax base in itself. So I looked at that to see, what if we allowed state spending, the spendable revenue that the government can have, state government can have, to grow on par with compensation of private employees? Well, after about 2000, especially after 2005, there is there are some savings to be harvested from this cap. It could work. It's a moderate effect. It's a little bigger during the recession, as you can see. And I think especially the recession effect is interesting, because what that tells you is that while private sector employees have been struggling here in Wyoming to make ends meet, the state government has gone ahead and spent like it's Christmas every day. And this gap here between what the private sector employees are earning and what the state is spending, that gap is a bill that we have to pay for one way or the other. Right now, over the last few years, the federal government has paid for that. We got some stimulus bill money, and excuse me, we've had a sustained increase or sustained higher level, I should say, of severance tax revenues. But overall, the second best alternative would be to let state government, spendable revenue that the state government has, to let it grow with what the private sector employees are earning. Now, one of the things that would happen if we do that, I'm sorry, I forgot to time myself. How am I doing here? Okay, thanks. Yeah. No, 5 minutes, okay. One of the things that would happen here is that we would introduce something called a payroll parity rule as part of any sort of cap here, especially if it was a compensation of private employees. Payroll parity means that we lock government payroll, and then we say you can only grow the total cost of government payroll by exactly the same percentage as private sector payroll is growing. In other words, if the private sector hires 100 more people, then the portion that adds, the percentage that adds to the total number of private employees, you take that percentage and you say, okay, now government can hire this more number of workers. You also can say that if compensation grows by 3% in the private sector, you cannot raise the salaries of government employees by more than 3%. So these are some instruments that would, if we put them in place now, over time would change the trajectory of growth of government, but government would still be growing. So this is a necessary but far from sufficient step to take to turn the tide on growing government. If we were to do this, especially the Tabor model, we would slowly but steadily release more, let the private sector keep more money. And when the private sector can keep more money, they have more resources available when we ultimately make the transition into a private sector driven economy where we take away all the non-essential government programs, reform them so that the private sector is allowed to take over. Once we get to that point, we're going to see a boost of growth and prosperity in our state we've never seen before. I'll stop there with one more final remark. It's that I hope to move. The next step here would be to start looking at legislative initiatives. Of course, I can't do that. I'm just saying that I'll be happy to support anybody who wants to take an initiative for the legislature for the next session to introduce a bill based on this. I'd be more than happy to support you for that. As in my position as a C3 employee, obviously I don't lobby, but that's about it.
We'll take questions.
Dr. Larson, I think it was Andy Jackson that said legitimate functions of government are or ought to be sufficiently simple that a society should not have its most talented people working for the government. What's the impact of this when you're trying to get parity between the public and private sectors in compensation? If the people working for the government are primarily filling potholes and picking up trash, and people in the private sector are programming computers or delivering medical care, you'd expect there to be a substantial discrepancy, wouldn't you?
Yes. Well, government has changed a bit since Andrew Jackson's days, unfortunately. Government workers get paid as if they were the most talented on the market, and I'm not going to put anybody down who is. I mean, I've been a government employee myself. When I was a grad student, I was at a totally tax-paid university, and some of the after I got my PhD and I started teaching, I was criticized by the union representing my co-workers because I in a survey I had put in that I worked too many hours. I was not supposed to work more than 37.5 hours a week, and I put 50, 55, something like that, and they came with a figure. I think that the major problem with government here in Wyoming is not necessarily that they're being directly invasive, but the way that they absorb people into their payrolls that could be available for the private sector if government wasn't there. Government can artificially inflate compensation, both when it comes to benefits and to paychecks, because if they don't get the revenues they want, they'll put a gun to your head and say you have to give it to me.
Any of the Hayes studied group that you cited, that, if I understand it correctly, led to increase in government employees' salaries or compensation. Why did that happen? Because it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that government employees, if you include benefits, are overcompensated relative to the private sector.
It began as an initiative by Governor Friedenthal, and some of it started before my time in the legislature, but the appropriations chairs at the time and the governor believed that state employees, and I think a lot of it was driven from the university, were not being paid at a level that was competitive to bring people in. And the university has always been sort of the outlier that's driven some of this because they're trying to recruit these professors. And so, so they embarked upon the Hay study. And that has been, even in my last term, we were passing increases 2, 3, 4% to try to bring people up to market. It's still not complete. I mean, in the eyes of government, it's not done. There's still more to be done.
Sounds kind of self-serving, doesn't it, on the part of the university?
Well, you know, it might be a coincidence that the Senate Chairman of Appropriations was from Laramie, but it certainly didn't hurt them. Question back.
This budget, this last budget that the governor signed, I'm a little bit confused here. Did he sign a budget that increased the amount of money from this budget to the previous budget?
Yes. Well,
thought so.
It's a supplemental, so he added to the budget that's currently in place, he added to it.
So his 8 and then 6% cuts in the budget didn't materialize.
The $60-some million that they cut, he actually rolled back in.
Then
If that makes sense, I know it's a little confusing. Yeah.
Sven, and I have a little bit of a question, and you have to speak slowly because I'm kind of a slow guy. Your first paragraph here, where you're patting the governor on the back for signing this budget that says that signed a budget that grows spending of the state government at historical low rates. Tell me, what does that mean?
It's an increase, or decrease, if you will.
So does he deserve a pat on the back for
Yes,
this?
he does, and I'll explain why.
That a smaller increase means nothing to me.
It does, because it means that your taxes are not going to go up as much. I understand your frustration. I share it. Believe me, I do. But let me put it this way. I would like to see a government that is about that small. The government we have now is about this big. And in order to get there, I'm probably never going to see a government this small in my lifetime. But if I know that we're slowly working our way down there, I'm fine with that. And we are working with politicians. We have elected officials who, for the most part, are good people. For the vast majority of them are good people and indeed go into politics because they want to do good. But when it comes to the appropriations process, when it comes to the fiscal side of government, it is run by a very small group of people. Amy can talk much better about this than I can. But what happens is that they get into this habit of spending more. We have baseline increases. We have increases every year in federal funds that require us to spend more, etc. We have a lot of mechanics in the budget that continuously grow it. And what Meade has done is that he has actually put a foot down and said, we can't grow government as fast. And that's new thinking. I hate to admit that it is something he deserves a pat on the back for. But nevertheless, without a first step, we're never going to get to that small government that we want. Chris Christie in New Jersey, I just happened to mention that again, has actually kept spending flat since he got in office, literally flat since he got in office. And that's a much better approach. And then if we could see somebody who would actually cut spending, it would be even better. So there would be more pats on the back the closer they get to actually cutting spending.
Yeah, and I would say that, as Sven said it well, that it can be very frustrating when people hear that it's a victory that we've cut the increase. That sounds not logical to us. It doesn't work in our personal budgets. But in government, it's a step. It's a first step. Sven and I and everyone here at the Liberty Group, we talk about how, cutting government. We need to cut government. But what we have to come up with is how. How do you cut government? Given that we live in a political society where we have to deal with the political side of it and then just the mechanics of this massive state government, and how and where do we start applying those cuts? And that's some of the work that Sven's been doing.
I'm just curious. I know it would take somebody with some intestinal fortitude, as they say, across the board over in the legislature. But why doesn't somebody just say no and get a program going as far as the regulations that come from the feds? Because as you illustrated to a certain extent, every time the feds make an offer of money, it comes with a 2 or 3 thick volume of regulations that the state has to pay for. And isn't it time we started saying no, like Christie did, like Perry is doing in Texas? Because if not, we're going to have to pack up and move to Texas because we can't afford the taxes that are going to be laid on a limited population to support a runaway government.
Well, I think you hit on a very important element when you started naming names like Christie. You touched on something there. Those are states where the citizens elected someone in their executive branch that had leadership and vision and decided to say no. And that's one of the really important steps. I mean, I served 6 years in the legislature, and believe you me, there were plenty of legislators saying no, but not the majority. So there wasn't 31 in the House and 16 in the Senate. So there are legislators that say no, but there's not enough. And in the executive branch, if there's not a governor in the governor's office who's saying no, then it becomes an even more difficult task. So we need that kind of vision and leadership for people who will say no. And cutting, you would think even elected legislators. I remember my freshman year, we went in and a group of us freshmen, we met at the Plains Hotel one evening and we were going through the budget and we were going to cut. We had all these ideas, lots of cuts because there were just, I remember there was a paperless initiative at the department, the DEQ, $7 or $8 million, and we thought, this is just stupid. Why would we do this? And cut. And we got onto the floor the next day, and we just got decimated by all the senior legislators. We'd get up to the mic and say, here's my amendment, and it was like over in a heartbeat. Literally, they were calling for the vote, and we were done. So it's a lot more difficult than you think, and it really starts at that point of leadership.
And the one way to get around that, there are many ways around it. One way is for informed citizens to either run or to make unequivocal demands and to constantly pressure our elected officials. One more thing about the federal funds. I hear a little bit more of a concern. I think this grabbing of some of the severance taxes have really gotten some people nervous and started thinking this is I hate to quote Rahm Emanuel, but this is a crisis we can actually exploit. Because this is the example that we've been talking about this here at the Wyoming Liberty Group for over the better part of the last 3 years. We've been warning about cuts in the federal spending. First, we talked about how the extra money from the stimulus bill was going to go away. Don't increase spending permanently based on that. Then we've talked about how the sequester was going to spill over into the federal aid to states. That's exactly, we're seeing the first step of that now. And so far they haven't been listening, but I think they can do that now. And we are developing solutions here for how to get out of the dependency on federal government. I believe that there's a chance we can work with other states on this issue. I've talked to people at other think tanks in other states that are getting hit by the same thing. There's a slow awakening. But again, it's back to your point that you made. I mean, we think we know how to turn a compact car around on the dime. Here we're talking about turning a train of tractor trailers around on the same dime. It's not easy, and it's easy to get frustrated. But if we have patience, we're going to prevail.
Thank you. Just for instance, if we were able to have smaller government and cut state employees, federal employees, county employees, etc., how are those people going to be absorbed into the economy? It seems like, you know, they have jobs, they do pay into state taxes, etc. If we would just cut government, what happens to our economy? What happens to those people and their jobs? And I'm not saying I'm for big government. I just have thought about this quite often. What would happen?
Yeah, you raise a very good point, and this is one of the difficult issues to grasp. There are those who are extremely impatient and say, "Just cut government, damn it, never mind the consequences." Ron Paul, whose philosophy I share wholeheartedly, had a program for cutting $1 trillion out of the federal budget in 1 year. That would have wreaked havoc on the economy if he'd done that, unfortunately. And the reason is, it's like you have a parasite that has gotten hold of your body and nestled itself into all your organs. If you just slash it like that, your organs are going to die. What you have to do is pull it out string by string. There are a lot of local communities where this would be particularly harmful. If you shut down half of the school district in County X tomorrow, you would definitely have this problem, and it would give the efforts to shrink government a bad name. So what we have to do is to follow the plans, the steps that we're developing here, and I have some blogs on our website that discuss this. Is you have to take program by program, step by step, make sure that government transitions out and you allow the private sector to transition in. Let me give you an example. If we were to shut down government public schools, and if we did it in an orderly fashion, I'm sure that a lot of people who work in public schools would go out and start a private school because they're good at education. But that said, I am not very concerned about highly paid government bureaucrats who have lavish compensation compared to private employees, because if they are really worth the money they're getting, they should also be able to get a job in the private sector.
I'm a business owner here in Cheyenne. Came in very unaware of anything having to do with regulations and tax issues and permits and licenses and all this, what I call garbage. And what I'm doing right now, and if I can, I'm trying to find out a way not to be an agent of the state of Wyoming. I don't want to say for 1 year, I'm going to charge you to eat my food 5%, because you don't owe me 5% to eat my food. I owe the government, after you eat it, so much money, they say. But they can't prove it to me. There's nobody that I've talked to in 11 years that can show me where I have to, or where I've been assigned, because I have a business here, that I have to be an agent for the Internal Revenue Service. If I find that, I will tell all of you, because I will quit, and then I will try to get for you a whole group of everybody here in Cheyenne and every place else to go ahead and stop doing that. What I can do is take and make my prices maybe a quarter more for my meal, make some money, put it back in the system, and we can do it ourselves. Can't we do that? Or if any one of the attorneys here can tell me where that statement is that I have to be a government agent, show it to me, because if you can't, I'm going to start on my own thing to not ever go up to the Internal Revenue Service with another check. ever.
Real quick, very good points. Maureen is running a regulations project here, so I think you should talk to her. Sounds like you guys could have a very interesting conversation.
Well, and there's no doubt, I mean, in the budget project, rules and regulations are a part of this as well, because they're part of the tentacles of government, and they're particularly the part of the tentacles of government that strangle out private sector. Our agencies have broad authority under the rules and regulations codes in Wyoming to make rules and regulations, and we see it all the time, and it's some of the work that Maureen is going to be doing. The governor did pass in this budget a small amount of money, about $200,000, to start taking a look at the number of rules that agencies are passing on a weekly basis in the state. And Maureen, remind me, what state is he looking at? Was it Utah had just did this. The governor there was able to do an across-the-board study and basically wipe away hundreds of rules and regulations, old ones, and we see it all the time. I can give you an example. A year ago, the Department of Education, under broad authority of a statute that was put in place in the 50s, decided to change rules and regulations for private schools as far as reporting. And they decided, in their infinite wisdom, the bureaucrats there decided that they wanted to go take a look at these reporting requirements for private schools and mirror them after what the public schools have to report. They just decided that, well, it would make more sense to us to have them uniform. That shows you how broad their power is. I'm not for sure that the statutes that were passed by the legislature in the 50s intended for private schools to look like public schools. I think they intended them to be private schools, but they have broad authority. So,
well, one of my permits for running a food establishment is to have a permit for soda. Now, I have to have a permit to put a can of soda into a refrigerator and have somebody take it out of the refrigerator. But when I go down to the office to find out where that where that statute, where that issue is stated, the only thing I can get is a 1922 ordinance issue that says businesses have to have a business license. I'm not going to fight that, but the soda and tobacco used to be together. Then they wiped out tobacco. They didn't wipe out the permit, and I said, okay, if that's the case, I did soda and tobacco together. So you're going to cut it in half so I don't have to pay, and it'll be half of that. Oh, no. They raised it. They raised it, and now I'm paying for that, and I went back down to the county clerk's office, and I said, I'm not going to pay this anymore. And everybody around there looked at me like I should go to jail somewhere. And I said, if I don't have to, you don't have to. If I can prove I don't have to, I'll bring it out everywhere I can and tell you that you don't have to. And what I was trying to say was, if all these things are so old and the government can change all this stuff, why can't we change it back?
That's exactly right.
You make a good point, and I think a lot of governors, they see, and I'm hoping our governor, he's put the money in there, but I think more citizens should talk to him about encouraging our local governments, so our local commissioners, our local mayors, to do the same thing. They could be sweeping through their ordinances and making those changes.
Yeah, there's another side to this also, is that the federal government is more and more trying to micromanage, even at that level. I would say microscopic manage what's happening. So for one example is what's going on in the school cafeterias, the number of calories you can serve. If you let Michael Bloomberg become president, you're probably going to need a permit just to be. You're going to have to apply for a permit just to be able to buy the soda. It's going to be. This is a wonderful example of government overreach, and I know you and Maureen have a lot to talk about, and I'm really glad for that, because this is exactly the kind of stories that we need in order to advance liberty.
Yeah, all of the comments here and everything that you guys talked about is academic, okay? Yes, that's why spending increased, and yes, that's why government is ridiculous, and yes, that's why they have all this money that they spend and so on and so forth. You could put the plans together and we can all say, yeah, let's go do it. Well, we can't do it without power. Power is the only thing that will change the way things work now. Whether it's the stupid regulations that they make up or the real money that they spend in actual budgets, whether it's legitimate or completely bogus. The point is, they have the guns, they have the power, and we don't. So my question to both you guys is there any hope in this state to get rid of leadership, Lubnow, Ross, Meade, so on and so forth, that represent the power that wants to increase government and replace it with leadership like Cale Case, Kendall Croker, several others, who would actually shrink government? Is there any leadership, any person, any group of people who are focused only on the political process and only on creating an organization or creating a movement that would actually be the spearhead to take on the good old boy network that has put us in this hole that we're in right now? So I'd like both you guys to comment. Are there any hope? Is there any leaders? Is there anything?
Yeah, let me, Amy can talk much more about this. Let me make a brief comment first. You have to go take one step back. There's a lot of good people who want to cut government. They just don't have the intellectual firepower, the ammo for it. And that's what Wyoming Liberty Group provides. And we are now at a point where we're rolling out actionable solutions. We're coming to a point where we can say, you have to do this, you have to do that. This paper, for example, tells you what would we need in tangible terms, in actionable terms, in order to cap overall government spending. There's one piece of legislation to be derived from this right here. And once we have that, the good people, I'm not going to get into name calling, but the good people can then use that to reinforce their own positions, to grow an even bigger backbone, and to get more support from people like the good people who are here tonight. So, but Amy knows more about this than I do.
No, I mean, I would agree with Sven, and I think you're right, and I know there's a lot of pessimism about the idea when you look at leadership and think, how do we overcome this? And here, we at the Liberty Group really are here to do the academic work to sort of open up, crack the light, be transparent, show people, even those in elected office who may not have seen this information, equip them and give them that. And then the rest of it, Don, as you well know, lies in the hands of the citizens of this state, the people who go to the polls, people who run for office. That's where it lies. So it may seem overwhelming that there needs to be a huge shift, but I would agree with Sven. There doesn't need to be so much of a huge shift as we need to really equip those elected officials who may not have the information, and then see maybe a few more added. Carolyn.
I would just add to that the, for instance, I think this is on. Is it
Yeah, the people can hear it online.
Very good. I believe that the cities and towns get 30 or 35% of their income from the legislature. Sven, is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Local governments get 35%, up to 35% of their revenue from the state. Yes.
So it isn't just the legislators that we need to say certain things to about standing up to the force. It actually is giving not only them the courage to stand up to their constituents, but to a very huge lobby, which is WHAM. And most people don't understand that. And it is, we here in Cheyenne can do our job with our legislators, but then we actually have to find a way to give those people out in the state the high sign that they must do that with their legislators also, because otherwise we just can't make this work. And then secondly, Sven, I didn't understand what you were talking about, getting rid of severance. What did you mean?
The 53 million.
No. You mean on the long haul? I see what you mean. Yeah. I think it is a problem for our state to depend so much on severance taxes. I know this is a hot topic here, so very controversial to say, but I do not believe that the severance taxes is ultimately good for either the state government or the long-term health of the Wyoming economy. This is like telling people in Alaska that they're not going to get their permanent fund dividend, that we should take that away. But from an analytical viewpoint, I'll be happy to elaborate on that later. But I just think it's part of the things we have to look at as a problem, because it's a spending driver.
I'll go from that and then back to the local government discussion you were having. But yeah, I think a lot of given, of course, what just happened last week with the Department of Interior, this all began in the 1920s with the agreement with the federal government. We got 50% of the federal mineral royalties and the coal lease bonuses. What, about 4 or 5 years ago, the Obama administration came in and took our 50% down to 48%, and the federal government now gets 52%. And they did that just overnight. Now we woke up last week to find out the Department of Interior sending a letter saying, we're going to take 5.1% for 5 months. And they did it, and they can do it. And if they can do that, they can take our 48% down to 38%, 28%, 18%, and then ultimately 0. And they can do that very quickly. And that will solve Sven's issue right away. The severance tax, those monies will be gone.
But what does that do to Wyoming with a large percentage of our state in federal lands? And there should be compensation for that. But if you take that away, there is we don't have that property to use to make money.
Well, I think I have a lot of respect for you, Carolyn, but I think you're missing one link in the. You're implicitly assuming that we're still going to have a big government somewhere. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of conventional thinking around this. But if you take a step back and say, how much government could the severance taxes pay for? Should we have that government? I would contend we shouldn't. So this is a strictly philosophical argument we're having now. I know that the path to that small government is very, very long. As to the idea of federal lands, I think that's terrible that there's so much federal land in the western states. That should be private land.
Yeah.
So this is our last question.
Is the money that they cut, didn't send us, does that go to a specific fund, or does that just go into the general fund?
So severance taxes go to several places, and I did bring my handy-dandy guide. We can go through it. Ultimately, this money that's being taken away will affect the BRA, the Budget Reserve Account, and the School Foundation Account. It goes to other places. At the beginning of the year, it would go to the Department of Transportation, but all those have caps, and they've already reached them, so it won't affect their dollars. This will specifically affect the Budget Reserve Account, which is sort of the feeder account into general fund spending, and then School Foundation, which of course pays for our schools.
Time to get up, stretch, and talk with one another, ask questions of our staff, and thank you very much for coming. Remember that we do have a first Tuesday meeting next month, and it will be on key liberty votes. In other words, we looked at all the bills, we looked at how people voted, and we chose the ones that could tell the sheep from the goats in terms of supporting liberty or failing to support liberty. So thank you for coming tonight, and have some cookies and enjoy. Thank you.